Hello and welcome. My name is Dvorak. I'm a clinical psychologist and chronic pain specialist. I have more than 35 years of professional experience working in healthcare and rehabilitation, and I have been working as a psychologist since 2001. The clinical approach that I have been practicing for more than 20 years is called psychological flexibility. It's probably best known under the name of acceptance and commitment therapy. Acceptance and commitment therapy is the newest and most modern form of cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT, a term that you may have heard before. It is a feature of acceptance and commitment therapy that knowledge and skills are being emphasized as much as anything else when it comes to mental well-being and mental health. So this is a really important part of the work that I do with my clients. It is also noteworthy that in acceptance and commitment therapy, mental illness labels are not of any great concern in general, but particularly so when it comes to chronic pain and other chronic health conditions, which is something I have been specializing in for many years. So thank you for watching this little introduction video. If you are interested in finding out more and getting a more detailed explanation of psychological flexibility, acceptance and commitment therapy, etc., then please keep watching this video, as there will be a presentation following that will hopefully clarify some of the questions that you may have. Otherwise, I will be happy to answer any questions you have and give you information that you need. So please don't hesitate to contact me or to make an appointment if you have already decided. Hello, my name is Dvorak. I'm a clinical psychologist and chronic pain specialist. My clinical work is grounded in and based on acceptance and commitment therapy, which is the newest form of cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT. There are some very important differences between acceptance and commitment therapy and older forms of CBT. And in this video, therefore, I would like to explain how acceptance and commitment therapy, or psychological flexibility, which is the method that is coming out of the therapy form, how this is looking at physical and emotional pain. From a psychological flexibility point of view, it is important to know that all human emotions and reactions are seen as a natural and normal part of life. That most definitely does include anxiety, sadness, grief, or anger. And it's unrealistic even to think of mental health as some ideal state of always being completely free of these negative emotions. In fact, what we have come to think of mostly as negative emotions, or even as signs of a mental illness, these emotions actually do serve, they are meant to serve, an important self-protection function in life. However, although these reactions are a natural and normal part of human life, the thoughts, the emotions, the body sensations, they most definitely can go wrong. This self-protection system can go wrong and turn against you. That happens in particular when this alarm system is too intense. When there's anxiety or low mood or grief or anger that is so intense that it is in itself incapacitating, that it makes life just too hard and makes it impossible to function in a normal way. So if the alarm is too intense, the system is really not working as it is supposed to work for us. Then there are situations where the alarm the emotion, the body sensations, and the thoughts that go along with that goes on for too long. There are situations where anxiety is very useful. If you, for example, are crossing a road, you're walking across a road, and then you see a car coming, and the car is coming very quickly, and you just catch a glimpse of the driver who does not seem to be paying any attention to what's going on, maybe looking at their cell phone or something. That is a situation where I would want you to be very anxious immediately and get out of that situation, run off the road, the street as quickly as you can to avoid being run over. So that would be a good example of a short-term alarm system that is actually potentially saving your life or your health. But very unfortunately, anxiety, low mood, we often call that depression, anger, grief, it goes on for far too long to be of any practical use for someone's life. And then it's entirely possible that this alarm is being triggered without any obvious reasons, that there is anxiety that is not possible to put the finger on what exactly it is that is triggering this anxiety. It's often talked about as generalized anxiety or diffuse anxiety. Same with low mood and depression and sadness, where everything seems to be in order in someone's life, and yet here they are being quite sad and depressed. And of course, if and when that happens, if this alarm system is being triggered and the emotions are happening and the body sensations are happening and there is no good reason, then the whole alarm doesn't make any sense. It's a bit like a car alarm that goes off and it's wailing away and no one has even looked at the car, let alone touched it or broken into it. So what I would like to do now is to explore in quite some detail how and why this is happening, how our natural alarm system, a self-protection system, can go wrong, because that is important to understand how psychological flexibility, as the method that comes out of acceptance and commitment therapy, can be the way forward to experience greater well-being and more quality of life again. So let's bring it right back to the beginning. If and when it is possible to put the finger on what has happened, there might be an identifiable trigger, a problem. And it could be an illness or an injury. It could be a threat of some sort. And that could be a physical threat, or it could be a more psychological threat. It could be being sort of bullied, maybe undermined, attacked at work, in social circles, social media these days. So threat is a big term, and it doesn't have to be physical. It can also be a psychological threat. It could be that some injustice has been done and has happened to the person. It could be that something or someone very, very important to that person has been lost, a loss. So all these situations in life, when life is not as it should be, that will act as a trigger. And what is being triggered is an alarm. That's the first step. And the alarm that is being triggered is, initially at least, pretty much an emotion. So it is this fear, anxiety, panic, anger, frustration, sadness, despair, whatever, whichever flavor, depending on what the situation, what the trigger is. This is what the alarm feels like. But there are also physical sensations. There's often a sense of heaviness, of tension, heart palpitation, the shakes, pain. When it's about illness and injury, how do we know that we have an illness or injury? It's because there's pain. So that's the purpose of physical pain. But it's also the purpose of emotional pain to alert us to the fact that we are being wronged or being threatened or in some way, that we have lost something or someone. Now, it doesn't stop there though. The next step in that self-protection system is that we, and I want to say especially as human beings, we do react to these physical sensations and to the emotions that go along with it. We react to this alarm. And quite frankly, for the alarm to work, we have to. If an alarm doesn't trigger any reaction, it's not a very good alarm. This is why fire alarms or other alarms are usually very unpleasant. They have a very unpleasant, they are loud and they have an unpleasant sound and noise to it. So this is why pain is pain. It's unpleasant. That's why the sensations and the emotions of anxiety or frustration or anger or sadness, they are very, very unpleasant. And it is this unpleasantness that will trigger our reactions. And what are these reactions? Well, in human beings, there's actually now more emotions and more physical sensations. These physical sensations have probably something to do with some hormones that have been released. You probably have heard adrenaline, because in many ways, what I'm talking about here, this self-protection system, you could call this famous flight or fight response. So there are physical sensations, heart palpitations, dry mouth, the shakes, getting dizzy, hot, cold, whatever it is, getting tense. These are the physical sensations. But then there is distress and upset about having emotions in the first place. So there is upset and distress about having this anxiety. There is distress, there is an urge, which we come to in a moment, to do something about that, about frustration. It's not a pleasant emotion to have. So there's a reaction to that. And as human beings, our fabulous big brains will more or less immediately usually produce a lot of thoughts about this experience, that alarm experience, the emotions. Where do they come from? What's going on? This is terrible. So there's a commentary that starts to kick in about this experience. And so we have lots of thoughts, probably lots of thoughts about what's causing this? What is the threat? What is the problem? What is the illness? What's going on? Lots of thoughts. And all of that, the emotions, the extra physical sensations, and the thoughts, they essentially are all about creating an urge, a motivation, a drive to do something, to act. That's the whole point. Yet again, if an alarm cannot be heard, because it's a very gentle, pleasant thing that easily blends into the background, wouldn't be a good alarm. But also, if no one is reacting to that alarm, then that wouldn't work out so well either. It wouldn't be much of a self-protection system. So we have to react to it. So there's an urge to just do something about that. And primarily, I think it's usually about trying to remove whatever has triggered the alarm in the first place. And that makes a lot of sense. So if you think about pain, physical pain as being the alarm, and then reacting to that, really not liking the pain, in a nutshell, that would drive the person experiencing that to seek help, to seek medical help, to get a cure for the illness or injury or whatever it is that is triggering this pain, that is the root cause. Many patients, when it comes to physical pain, talk about wanting to know and wanting the root cause of their pain to be addressed. So removing that trigger. But also when it comes to threats, physical or psychological threats, it is about escaping that situation, escaping that threat. Now, when we're looking at the anger and frustration type alarm, that may actually end up in fisticuffs, potentially. That's the fight reaction. So quite literally fighting back physically, or once again, modern times, maybe not as much physical, fighting back in otherwise office politics. Um, you know, the fight can happen in very non-physical way. It's still a fight. So in general terms, our actions that are being triggered, that is the outcome of this alarm, and then our displeasure, our upset and distress about experiencing the alarm, is really mostly, at least initially, about fixing the problem, fixing the trigger, making it go away. And if and when that works, then the system has really done well. This is what it is about. If you run off the road and avoid and escape this car that's coming towards you, that is mission accomplished. That's great. Now, the first problem with that whole system, however, we need to acknowledge that, is that sometimes what is being done to address the original trigger, the situation, to escape the situation, is actually, unfortunately, potentially creating new problems and new triggers. So, especially when we're talking about anxiety, which then can be in some ways easily be fixed by just avoiding certain situations and places and events. So mission accomplished, anxiety is gone or doesn't even happen because we can plan ahead. However, if that situation and that place, if that is something that actually you would have wanted to be, something important is happening to you, or maybe, yeah, let's say it is important for you to be there, then you are actually missing out. So fixing the problem of the anxiety, the alarm, and being upset about feeling it that way comes at the cost of missing out of something important. And sometimes, maybe when we're looking at frustration and anger, and it is ending up in throwing a punch at someone or making a hole in the wall, then that will have potentially consequences, not just for the hand. So there's a new trigger because the hand might get injured doing this, but there's also maybe problems with the law, getting into trouble for doing that, and costs because things need to be repaired then. And if someone is being depressed or anxious and therefore is avoiding a certain situation, maybe at work, that is the trigger for all that, then the problem associated with that is not going to work sooner or later, means not earning the money. So there are side effects, if you like. There are side effects, consequences that in some ways are the cost of taking care of the original trigger that triggered that whole alarm. And sometimes the question is really, do the new problems and the new negative consequences outweigh the solution? Is the solution equal or worse than the original problem? So that's probably not that great. And then we need to acknowledge that not every situation can be fixed. Not every threat can be avoided. Not every, well, definitely when it comes to loss, it cannot be brought back. So if not every injury, not every illness can be cured or completely cured, not quickly anyway. So if we acknowledge that not everything can be fixed, that the trigger cannot always be removed, then the second best solution, if you like, outcome would be to switch off the alarm. Because in many ways, the drive, the urge to do something comes from the upsetting, unpleasant, difficult, challenging nature of that original emotion and body sensation. So this is where we're looking at blocking or suppressing the alarm. If it is about physical pain, this is when we start talking about painkillers. medications. If it is about emotional pain, if you like, anxiety, low mood, sadness, then we might be talking about anti-anxiety medication, antidepressant medications. And from a psychological viewpoint, psychologists have been for a long time been happy to sort of chip in, trying to switch off the alarm. And this is mostly about distraction techniques, relaxation techniques, maybe imagery, putting yourself into a pleasant, calm space where there is no pain and no stress. These kind of interventions. They're all about switching off the alarm. It doesn't change anything about life and what triggered the alarm, but they are meant to reduce at least significantly, or if we can, switch off the alarm. The biggest problem, of course, happens if the original trigger cannot be removed, or the cost of removing it is so high that it's really not worth it. And if the alarm can also not be switched off. And here we need to acknowledge that, unfortunately, medications, when it comes to pain, physical pain, as much as when it comes to anxiety or symptoms of depression or something like that, are not perfect. And while they do help a number of people taking them, there are also many others for whom it hasn't been the solution. It hasn't switched off their emotions. It hasn't switched off the anxiety. It hasn't switched off the sadness, lifted the depression. It hasn't switched off the pain. And then, of course, we're starting to be a bit stuck, because that's not what that system is for. The logic of that self-protection system is about finding a solution, fixing things, getting through it, and we're done. But if we're not done, if there is no solution, either getting away, removing the trigger, or switching off the alarm, then this system, unfortunately, is turning on itself, which means it's turning on you. Because this alarm is still going, the physical pain is still going, the emotional pain, the anxiety, the sadness, the grief, the anger, the frustration, whatever it is, it's still going. And therefore, we still don't like it. And if all methods of trying to switch off that alarm hasn't worked, that means we're still distressed and upset, understandably, about having that experience. But that has nowhere to go if there's no practical solution, right? So our reactions, unfortunately, sort of fan the flames. It goes back and makes the alarm louder. Imagine a smoke detector, fire alarm, that's not just going off if there's heat or smoke being detected. It's going off. But then an alarm that gets louder and louder and louder because it sort of gets excited, not in a good way, about its own sound. That's what we're looking at. So the whole self-protection, flight or fight response is turning really into something very, very unhelpful. Now, this may all have sounded a little bit technical, a little bit sort of abstract. So I'd like to share with you a little story that I have shared with many people I have worked with over many years. And I have been told that this was a story that somehow kind of maybe made it a little bit clearer what it is that I'm trying to say here. So here it is. Here's a little less technical explanation. So let's say, once again, life is not as it should be, some shape or form. Details don't matter. Life is not as it should be, and the alarm is being triggered. Nothing new. Let's just now imagine that this alarm would be like a fire. It's a very hot, burning fire right next to you. So here you are, and there's the fire right next to you. Very unpleasant sitting next to that fire. Very uncomfortable. Very distressing. So I would expect anyone to start reacting to that experience of sitting so close to this hot fire. And the whole point of that is the fire being so hot, you not being happy about being exposed to that heat, you try to get away. You try to put the fire out, get someone else to put it out, drag you away from that fire. But none of that is happening. So all of that upset that I spoke about, more emotions, more physical sensations, quite literally adrenaline being a part of that, more thoughts about sitting right next to that fire. Oh my God, I'm getting burned. It's horrible. I need to get out of this. Whatever the thoughts are, all of this is like energy. It's like petrol that is all meant to give you the oomph, the energy to get away from that fire in whatever way, right? But if you cannot get away from that fire, as I said before, you cannot put the fire out and you cannot get away from that fire. All that energy, that petrol has nowhere to go, and it will therefore go right back into that fire. What happens if you pour petrol, kerosene, something like this, into a fire? Well, the fire burns even hotter, brighter, and it will burn for longer than it might have without any petrol being poured into it. So now that fire has gotten bigger. It was very upsetting to sit next to that fire in the first place. Now it got even hotter, which means there's even more energy being created because there's now a desperation level to get away from that fire. But there's still no tangible solution in that moment. So all that petrol goes back into the fire. Makes the fire go bigger. More petrol. Back into the fire. You see where this is going. It's a real vicious cycle. And this is the problem with human beings, that all these emotions that are meant to be helpful, they are meant to be a self-protection system to keep us alive, to keep us strong and healthy, can actually turn against us if there is no tangible, reasonably quick solution at the end that will take away whatever triggered the fire, the alarm, or that will shut down the alarm at least. That is the situation. I hope this little story has made sense to you, has brought home what this is all about. So here's now psychological flexibility, because just saying, well, it looks like we're stuck next to that fire and it's getting worse and worse, that's not good enough, of course. That's not good enough. So psychological flexibility is first about understanding that situation, understanding that we're looking at this self-protection system that has gone wrong. That's very important. And I hope maybe we have already had a conversation in an appointment, maybe not yet. I hope that this video is giving a good explanation. So for you to understand that the emotions, if it is anxiety, if it is sadness and grief, if it is anger, if it is physical pain, and then the distress about all that, that this is not a mysterious illness. It is a self-protection system, fight or flight or freeze, that is going wrong, that has gone wrong for you, that got stuck. So this is the main message. And then once that has been understood, then the work begins. And the work means learning skills and techniques, not physical. This is now all about working with your nervous system, working with your brain to break this vicious cycle. So these are the psychological flexibility skills that I will talk about in appointments, that I will put forward. This is what acceptance and commitment therapy to a large degree is about. It is about being able to notice and then to acknowledge, but then to attribute to this self-protection system, and then allowing, but then eventually hopefully sooner rather than later, being able to disengage from body sensations, emotions, thoughts, and urges, especially when the urges are trying to get you to do something that may backfire, like putting your hand through the wall or taking medication that doesn't work, but that maybe has significant side effects, for example. Noticing, acknowledging, attributing, allowing, and disengaging your alarm and your reactions. This is what psychological flexibility is about. Now, this sounds all probably still very weird and abstract. So this is something to flesh out, to make it personal, in sessions, in appointments, to figure out how that actually works. Because it's a lot harder to do, as I just notice your emotions. It's easy to say. We're not hardwired to do this. And it does actually require you to practice doing all this. I will have quite some guidance and advice on how to do it. And then gradually the brain, your brain, will actually start growing new connections. It's called neuroplasticity. It's a fascinating area in neuroscience the last 20 years. How we can get the brain to gradually grow new connections that will then allow us to do things that we normally would not do. The way I've talked about before, there's a trigger, triggers an alarm. The alarm is essentially creating a reaction. The reaction is about us, getting us to do something about that. This is all very automatic, very hardwired, very rigid, dare I say. And it's about having an alternative to that rigid automatic system. That's why it's called psychological flexibility. And then there's the part that is about connecting or reconnecting with life, with what's important in life for you. It's a very personal matter. What are your qualities? What are your values that have driven and should be driving what you do on a daily basis? It's not always easy to figure that out because pain, physical pain, emotional pain tends to disconnect us from life. It tends to disconnect us from our qualities and from our life directions, or can call it values. So we need to reconnect with it. And so learning all these techniques and skills, it is ultimately, in a nutshell, about being able to dial down our reactions. I think it's a tall order to say to stop them completely or eliminate them. So let's just say dialing it down, see how far you go. That is dependent on some degree on how much work and for how long you have been working on doing this. You will get better. So that's an interesting thing. It's really a little bit like going to the gym, physical exercise, and getting stronger and fitter and better. There's great parallels in that way. So dialing down the reactions, bypassing the alarm, if and when this is appropriate. I would not want you to bypass your alarm, that rush of anxiety. If you're in the middle of the road and there's a car coming towards you and is threatening to run you over, do not bypass the alarm. That's not a good situation. But there are many other situations where the solution is not that clear cut and it's not there, as I've explained. And then if we can't make life to how we think it should be for us, and if we cannot switch off the alarm, then it's time to bypass the alarm. And as I just spoke about, connect with life, with meaningful life. Life that reflects who you are, what your values are, what your choices are. And that together is creating quality of life. And this is really the aim of acceptance and commitment therapy and teaching all the skills around psychological flexibility. It's all about quality of life. And if all of this sounds a little bit strange still, or illogical, it's because it runs against certain types of logic that we do apply normally in our everyday life. I understand. It's actually a good thing. If this sounds a little bit back to front in a way, that's a good thing. Because then you're already catching on that there's maybe a different way of going about things than just following down the path that nature has hardwired into us. But it is important for you to know, having just listened to this presentation, that psychological flexibility, acceptance and commitment therapy, which has been around, well, it has been in development since the mid-1980s, and it has been out there, if you like, as a therapy form since 1999. So it's been a while. There's a lot of solid scientific research behind this approach. And the research indicates that there are many different physical and emotional problems to which this can be applied, and it can be applied in such a way that it makes a positive difference in someone's life. And when it comes to physical pain, chronic pain, which I have been specializing in for many years, acceptance and commitment therapy is actually the only psychological therapy that has been approved, if you like, as having strong research support for all and any forms of chronic pain, irrespective what the illness, injury, or what is causing the pain. There's no other therapy form that has that endorsement. So if and when you choose to work with me, what will happen initially, we will definitely explore your situation. It's a good idea to get a good handle on what are the triggers for you, what's going on, what's your life, what's happening in your life, what's your life context. We will explore your experience of this alarm and your reactions that has gone wrong. And we will also explore what you have tried so far. It's very important to know what works for you and what hasn't, because we don't want to repeat something that has not worked and maybe cannot work. And then I will provide you most definitely with lots of information and instructions and encouragement on how to achieve this greater psychological flexibility, on how to poke your brain into what's called neuroplasticity, so that eventually you can make yourself more independent of this natural but quite rigid, automatic, and sometimes, unfortunately, unhelpful self-protection response that is pretty much guiding our lives without us knowing necessarily. Thank you for watching this overview of psychological flexibility as applied to physical and emotional pain.